What's up? My name is Frank. This is the very first episode of Fork Ranger, and today we're gonna cook spinach pesto, the recipe that started this whole project. And we're gonna talk about canned tomatoes and the ugly truth behind them. And no, I promise this is not a clickbait title. I was really shocked. My whole life I've been interested in climate change. When Al Gore came out with An Inconvenient Truth, I was somewhere on a glacier and I was really heartbroken that this glacier was melting so fast. But somehow I never realized that my own daily habits matter as well. Until Zondag with Lubach. About 5 years ago already, he was saying that meat is worse than all public transport, trains, ships, airplanes, cars, everything combined. Remember that he was talking about showering less and saving water with that, but then a little piece of beef stuck between your teeth already used up 3 times as much water. So that for me was a painful realization that, okay, if I'm interested in climate change, I have to change some of my habits. So I started cooking with less meat. I didn't think it was easy enough. And then last year I wanted to research what makes the biggest difference when it comes to climate change. And I found this book where they calculate all the different solutions. What surprised me was that so many of the solutions are about food. In fact, the third best solution is reducing food waste, and the fourth best solution is eating a more plant-rich diet. And for 2 years I had already been saying as a joke, someday I'm gonna make a cookbook, because I was so frustrated with all the recipes. And there was this one recipe that I sort of stumbled upon by just throwing together a bunch of vegetables that I had lying at home. And I thought, well, if I can make this recipe, there have to be more recipes like this that can help people to eat more sustainable without meat. So I set out to make the book. And it all started with this spinach pesto. So this spinach recipe has become sort of the famous recipe because it was the first one I started with, but a lot of people have asked me since cooking it about the canned tomatoes. It's time to find out whether they're really actually less sustainable than the real tomatoes. So what's crazy is the amount of choice you have at the supermarket for canned tomatoes. I heard that the best taste comes from plum tomatoes, but then somebody sent me an email that plum tomatoes are the ones with the worst working conditions because migrants coming in Italy are doing the job for very low pay. So in the end I just bought all of them. I have no clue which is the best. Okay, so here are all our tomatoes, and I didn't have time to check it which is the best one because this is real life. I need to make dinner and it can't wait. I'm hungry. Usually you're supposed to cut everything before you start cooking, but I don't like waiting, so in order to save time I'm already gonna saute the onions. I forgot one thing. Sun-dried tomatoes. Burning the mushrooms. I like cooking efficient. I'm not going to use 2 separate pots for the beans. I'm just going to throw them into the pasta after a couple of minutes. sustainability. Okay, so last week I sent out a newsletter talking about sustainable tomatoes. In one research they looked at tomatoes cultivated in Sweden in a greenhouse and tomatoes from Spain transported to Sweden. And as you can see, the main chunk of emissions is about the cultivation of the tomatoes. Tomatoes from Spain, of course, they used up more transport emissions. But overall, the cultivation was the lowest. And was a lot lower still, the total impact, than tomatoes from Sweden made in a greenhouse with fossil fuel. And one of the most important things about this graph is the percentage of packaging and transport. If you look at it, you see that it's tiny. And this is the case for most food. The cultivation is more important than the packaging and the transport. So what happens with canned tomatoes is they farm them fresh from the field, they put them into the can and they cook them, and all the nutrients stay preserved. And if you transport these tomatoes, some are going to get squished, some are going to go bad, you have a lot of food waste. And the whole point is, of course, that these don't grow during winter. 2 people sent me an email saying that you should watch this video because there's more to it. So let's see.
When I make a pasta at home, I open a can of tears and pain.
So refugees landing in Italy, having nowhere else to go with no money, are getting hired by the mafia with the worst terrible conditions, having to fill a huge box of a couple of kilo tomatoes for only a few euros, of which they, at the end of the day, keep almost nothing, have to sleep in ghettos, terrible working conditions, working in 40 degrees Celsius, and having nowhere else to go. Modern slavery doesn't need chains, it needs vulnerability, discrimination, and a lack of the rule of law. When you watch something like this, it feels a bit ridiculous, to be honest, to talk about whether this one or this one is more sustainable from an emissions standpoint when out there people picking tomatoes are working like slaves. When I bought tomatoes today, these cost 2 euros and I thought it was outrageously expensive. After watching this can costs 45 cents. This one is outrageously cheap.
Job, even bad condition, then sometimes for myself.
And I knew this story already, but only after watching this do I realize that we are paying too little for our food. Yeah, there's no other way around it. This is definitely what I was buying to make all the recipes in the book. Yeah. Can of slavery. It does feel a bit ridiculous to be talking about which one of these is more sustainable if people are working like slaves to harvest them. But at the same time, climate change is the underlying factor of why more refugees will go to Italy, why this whole problem will become even worse. So we have to start somewhere. We have to start thinking about climate change. It's the big problem that we all run away from, but we can make small differences in our life that are going to make a difference. I was showing you the graph about the tomatoes from Sweden and from Spain, but the point that you miss if you look at only that graph is comparing tomatoes to dairy or meat. So by already skipping the meat, you're making such a big difference. And I think that's the important part, is that of course if you dive deep enough, there's always something that doesn't work, always something that is not ideal, but we have to start somewhere, and the best place to start is really using less meat and dairy. So by cooking this recipe, you're making a difference. So I want to encourage, if you start making this spinach pesto, let's try this expensive can of tomatoes, and let's try to change our perspective on it, because for me, just 2 days ago I thought that why would you ever buy a can of tomatoes for €2? But if you start thinking about what's necessary to put delicious tomatoes into a can and package it, sell it, transport it to the Netherlands, sell it in the supermarket, it makes sense maybe. And the good thing is that all the chefs are crazy about these tomatoes. These are the best tasting ones. You can really tell the difference. So not only are you enjoying your food more because it tastes better, it's also better for the environment because you're cooking without meat, and it's better for the people. I would hear you thinking, what can one meal really change? What does one can of tomatoes really change? I never thought that I would discover a recipe that now dozens of people are making. In fact, this week marks the celebration of selling 1,000 books. So 1,000 people are cooking spinach pesto now. So what can one meal really achieve? A chain reaction. And that for me is the story of spinach pesto. So on the website there's an update to the spinach pesto in the book with even more details, so you can get the best out of it, with one little surprise that a friend came up with. If you enjoyed this video, I would be really happy if you subscribe, because then it means that I can continue making this, and you give a starting YouTuber some encouragement. It would also be really helpful if you leave a review of the recipe on the website. If you don't have YouTube, you can subscribe to the newsletter where I will also send the videos. And of course, I'm happy to hear any suggestions about videos you want to see. Until then, see you next time.